Don't you know that there are certain things in life that you cannot afford to forget? Like your wife's birthday. That's never happened to me before, but if you've ever have, you know the feeling. Or like sometimes maybe your children's names. That's good to remember them. How about your passwords? Inevitably, you're trying to log in again to your account and you can't remember, was it my mother's name, maiden name, plus 1, 2, 3, 4, exclamation point? Have you heard the story from this developer in San Francisco? His name's Stephen Thomas, and in 2011, he forgot something very important. He did a little bit of work for some animation. He's a programmer. And then in 2011, he got paid in Bitcoin. Now, at the time, Bitcoin was only worth $1 per coin. So he got 7,000 Bitcoins to do this animation job. If you haven't been following the price of Bitcoin today, it's nearly $100,000 per coin. So you do the math. Somewhere along the way, if you don't know how cryptocurrency works, you need a digital wallet to hold your cryptocurrency. Then you need a digital key that unlocks your digital wallet. Losing that key, digital passcode, is very important to save that passcode. If you were to lose it, you cannot get access to your digital wallet. It'd be much like losing your actual wallet and any cash that was in it. So he thought to himself, I do not need to lose this key, so I will put it in a very safe external hard drive. Such a safe drive that upon 10 incorrect attempts on a password, the hard drive will fully encrypt itself and erase all of its contents. So you can lose it. And one day, he forgot his password to that drive. After 8 failed attempts, he realized he's only got 2 tries left at unlocking a digital wallet with 7,000 Bitcoins in it. To this day, if you were to do the math, that digital wallet and unlocking that passcode is worth nearly $700 million in today's Bitcoin value. There are certain things in life that you cannot afford to forget. Now, remembering your spouse's birthday, that's important. Remembering your passkey to your Bitcoin digital wallet, also quite important. But at the start of this new year, my job is to remind you that even more important than remembering your spouse's birthday or your passcode to whatever is remembering who God is and remembering who I am in light of that. In fact, if there's any 2 things that I want you to remember all year long, those would be the 2. Who is God, and who are you in light of that? Because then that splinters into all of the things that I must remember. And I cannot afford to forget, who am I? Who's my identity? How should I live my life? Where am I going? And it has all sorts of different implications from answering those 2 things. Who is God, and who am I in light of it? It's so important to forget. To remember, because forgetting has negative consequences. Forgetting has such serious consequences, such as fear, worry, but even more so, disobedience and turning to idolatry. That's a pattern that we see in the Old Testament over and over and over again. Listen to this in Judges 3:7. The Israelites forgot who God was, and they began to worship idols. Listen to Jeremiah 18. But my people have forgotten me. They make offerings to false gods. And throughout the whole Exodus story, do you remember the Israelites that we point our fingers at and we laugh at them? God just saved you from slavery. And then within days, they're worried about what's going to happen next. God literally gives them the bread of the angels, manna from heaven, and then they're worried, well, where are we going to get water from? He gives them water, then, well, where are we going to get our meat from? The miraculous provision. Have you ever had God show up in a mighty powerful way on Monday, and then by Tuesday, you forgot. And you're worried and you're fearful. Where did God go? Is God going to provide? Again, really, the story of Israelites isn't a look at these silly people. It's a mirror pointed right back at us. And we're to see ourselves in the story and say, wow, we forget our God. And forgetting has serious consequences, like turning to idolatry, like rebellious hearts, like hearts filled with fear. Listen to what James says. But prove yourselves doers of the word, not merely hearers, because you delude yourself. For if anyone is a hearer of the word and not a doer, he's like a man who looks at his face in the mirror, turns away, and forgets what he looked like. That's kind of a silly scenario, isn't it? It's almost a laughable scenario given to you. It'd be like you looking at a mirror, immediately turning away, and what? Forgetting what you look like. The one who looks intently at this perfect law, it's the law of liberty, and abides by it, not having become a forgetful hearer, but an effectual doer, this person, they will be blessed in all that they do. So remembering is even connected to our own blessing. Forgetting has serious consequences. That's the first big idea I want to plant in your spirit as we start this series. Today we're starting a new series called Remember Me, Overcoming Spiritual Amnesia. Remember me, overcoming spiritual amnesia, because like the Israelites, we are all susceptible to this disease of spiritual amnesia. We forget so quickly what God has done, and that has negative consequences. Not only that, here's the second big idea. We have been commanded to remember. Can you read this inscription here? It says, do this in remembrance of me. God has commanded us to remember. 1 Corinthians 11. It's been read before. Thank you, Bruce, but I'm going to read it again. This is Paul saying, for I received from the Lord what I delivered to you, that the Lord Jesus, on the night in which he was betrayed, he gave thanks and he broke the bread. He said, this is my body for you. Do it in remembrance of me. In the same way, he took the cup after supper, saying, this is the cup of the new covenant. This is my blood. Do this. As often as you drink it, do it. He repeats himself, do it in remembrance of me. So we've been commanded by God, commanded to remember him. Here's maybe a way we can phrase it so that we don't forget. Breaking the bread breaks amnesia. Breaking the bread helps to break spiritual amnesia. Why? Because we need rituals, we need habits, we need rhythms to help us remember things. That's part of the reason we celebrate the table every month. That's part of the reason we gather every week. This gathering right here is a spiritual ritual. It helps us remember, it realigns our priorities. We need rituals to keep us centered on the main thing. Listen to what God said in Deuteronomy 6. These commandments that I give to you, they're to be written on your hearts. Impress them upon your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. In other words, when you're walking East Beach or you're playing golf or you're riding your bike or you're out on the boat, whatever it is that you're doing, I want these commandments that I've taught you, they need to be part of your flow all the time. Tie them as symbols on your hands. Wear them as jewelry. Bind them on your foreheads. I don't know why I think of like a ninja band every time I read that scripture verse. We're going to require that on Sunday mornings now. You're going to walk in, you have to wear a bandana. Just kidding. Write them on the door frames of your houses and on your gates. In our house, we just did a foyer renovation project, and we have this really cool thing on our front door. If you've been at Wesley long enough to know that one time we had a leak in our cooling system. Our air conditioning uses very cold water as a refrigerant, and the lines are actually underneath this floor. And there was a time when there was a leak under this floor, and we had to remove all the pews every single board of flooring there had to be removed and replaced. This is Wesley history now. So this floor actually isn't the original floor. It looks like it is, but we had to replace it completely. And the floor was glued down, so it got ripped in pieces. And unfortunately, we had a dumpster full of this incredible heart pine because it is just impossible to save. I was glued. I was a youth pastor here at the time and not too proud to go dumpster diving. I got in that dumpster and I saved some of the original floor pieces from Wesley here. We have a coffee table at the house made of it. I scrapped enough pieces. But when we just redid our foyer, the threshold to our door is a piece of the original floor from Wesley. So every time we walk through our gate, every time we walk through our door, we walk over a piece of this sacred space where Thea and I were married, where all three of our kids were baptized, where I have experienced my own ordination, where I've experienced powerful moments of worship with every single one of you. You see, every time I walk through that threshold, I remember the promises of God. I'm breaking my own spiritual amnesia because I know how weak I am and how prone I am to forgetting God's promises, His provision, His goodness in my life. I know my own prone desire for sin and being tempted. No, I can't look at the mirror and then turn around and forget who I am. I must be reminded that I'm a son of God and I belong to Him. I must break spiritual amnesia in my life. We've got to find ways to remind ourselves. We do it through rituals, rhythm, coming to church, doing communion, the liturgy that we're about to read. In the Old Testament, the Hebrew nation, they had these built into their calendar. Think about the weekly Sabbath. It's a reminder of God's work in creation, that God rested. The Passover meal was a reminder that God passed over the nation of Israel and saved them from slavery. The tabernacle, the Festival of Booths, or Festival of Tabernacles, was a celebration and a reminding themselves that our people, our nation's history, there was a time where we wandered in the wilderness, we didn't have houses, and all the Hebrew nation, they leave their house and they live in a tent for a few days to remind themselves. See, they had these rituals and festivals and celebrations built in, and they become anchor points. I remember one time I was trying to fish with the boys. You know, when you come across the causeway, you go over the Little River and then the McKay River. And there's some nice oyster beds in there. We were trying to catch some reds, caught nothing. And that day, I remember, I was having a hard time setting the anchor, and I thought I set it, and then suddenly, you know, you're like, see, the current is slowly moving, something's not right. Then you try and reset it, and the anchor was just kind of bumping along the muddy bottom of the river. At 9 o'clock, I told this story, and somebody came up to me after, the more experienced captains. They're like, you just don't know how to set an anchor. Probably true. The current of life and culture want to sweep you away. If you don't have rituals and anchor points, you will get swept away. That's just the fact and the reality. These parts of our calendar, the Christmas celebrations and the Easters and the weekly and the daily and my devotional time, you see, they all become anchor points in my response to God's command. Forgetting has serious consequences, but I'm commanded to remember because I cannot afford to forget certain things in my life. And there's the last idea, is that it's my choice to remember. Not only does forgetting have consequences, and not only am I commanded to, but it's my choice whether I'm going to remember or not. It's an act of the will in order to remember what God is doing. So listen to Psalm 78 briefly, and then I'm almost done. Psalm 78 says, He decreed statutes for Jacob. He established law in Israel, which He commanded to the ancestors to teach their children. But then there's a little story that the goal was that they would put their trust in God and not forget His deeds, but to keep His commands. But then the men of Ephraim, it says, though they were armed with bows, they turned back on the day of battle. In other words, there was a day where they were going to have to go to fight, and they got afraid, and they turned back. Why? Because they forgot what God had done, the wonders that he had showed them. You see, remembering God's past work was tied to their courage and lack of fear on the day of battle. Many of you are battling battles right now. You need to be reminded of God's presence and his provision, and not get your mind overly filled with the wrong data. You ever have a phone that gets too full, and it's too, you pull it out because you want to take a picture, and the moment you try and take the picture, you get that horrible announcement: your phone's data is completely full. You cannot take the picture. Then you're forced with the horrible decision of deleting all the pictures of your least favorite children and just keeping the ones that you like. I've never done that. We fill our minds and our spirits sometimes, and we're overfilled, and we can't have a memory of God's past, his wonders, all the things that he has done, because we're just full to the brim of all the other stuff. We need to delete some of that to create some room in our spiritual memories to avoid the spiritual amnesia. It's an act of the will. That psalm, the way it finishes, says, they willfully put God to the test, demanding what they craved. It was an act of their will. They chose whether they wanted to remember God's promises or just go their own way and act out of fear. So not only is it a command, but I've got to choose to come to this table. I've got to choose to enter into this liturgy we're about to read together. Thankfully, God has given us tools to do that. And the liturgy we're about to read is just that. It's a tool to help us remember. When we do communion, it's a tool to help us remember. I'm so excited about this new series that we're going to be doing about remembering and overcoming spiritual amnesia. I hope you're going to be along for the ride with us. It's been really fun to study and prepare for it. I can't wait to inspire you with a lot of God's truth through it.